Ever get that feeling like someone does something so incredibly moving? Maybe it's tiny, like they grab your favorite drink without you even asking, or maybe it's big, like a huge surprise party, and when you try to explain how much it meant to you, words just completely fail.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think we've all been there, struggling to capture that feeling.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dive into today. How to describe romantic gestures in English.
Yeah.
We've got this really fascinating guide. It's actually over 5,000 words long, and it covers, well, everything. From the simplest definition of what a romantic gesture even is, all the way to like super advanced communication strategies.
Yeah, think of it like unlocking this whole new level of vocabulary and a deeper understanding of how we communicate, how we really express those feelings of love and affection. It's pretty amazing how much depth there is to it when you start breaking it down.
Right. And that's exactly what we want to do for you today. We're going to equip you, the listener, with a bunch of really insightful ideas and a vocabulary that'll help you better understand, appreciate, and express these romantic gestures in your own life. So whether you're thinking back on your own experiences, maybe writing about them, or even just wanting to connect with someone special on a deeper level, we're going to pull out all the good stuff from this guide, so you end up feeling totally informed without getting overwhelmed.
Sounds good.
So first things first, let's start with the basics. What are romantic gestures? According to our guide, I mean. What's the core definition?
Well, the guide actually starts with a really clear and broad definition. It says that romantic gestures are actions, words, or even symbols that are used to express love, care, and affection. And I think what's really interesting here is that it's not just limited to like the big Valentine's Day kind of things. It includes those quiet, everyday moments, those small things that often speak volumes about how we feel.
So it's like those little things we do for each other, the things that show we care, even without saying anything.
Exactly. And the guide kind of emphasizes that these gestures are like a language in themselves. They're a way to communicate these deep-seated emotions and really strengthen the bonds between people.
Huh. It almost makes you think about those little things differently. Like, even just someone bringing you a cup of coffee in the morning suddenly feels a bit more significant.
Right. And the guide goes on to break down these gestures into different categories, which is helpful for understanding the different ways we can express love.
So it's not just like a big, messy pile of gestures, right? It helps us make sense of all the different ways love shows up.
Exactly. It breaks them down into three main categories. First, you've got the physical gestures. And these are things like a comforting embrace, a kiss, or even just holding hands.
Yes.
Simple things, but powerful.
Right, right.
Then you have the verbal gestures. And this category includes everything from compliments and declarations of love to those really deep and meaningful conversations.
Okay, so even just telling someone how much you appreciate them would fall under this category.
Yep. Exactly. And then the last category is behavioral gestures. And this one's really interesting because it includes things like acts of service, maybe doing a chore you know your partner hates, or it could be thoughtful surprises, gifts, or just dedicating some quality distraction-free time to someone.
Oh, that's so true. I feel like that's my love language, just spending quality time together, you know? So that person who always remembers to grab your favorite snack, that's actually a romantic gesture. I never thought of it like that. But it's not just about the gestures themselves, right? The guide also talks about why they matter so much emotionally.
Yeah, and it's actually really clear about that. It says that romantic gestures are so powerful because they make us feel cherished and valued, which are really basic human needs. When someone does something thoughtful for us, it's like a deposit in our emotional bank account.
Yeah.
It strengthens those bonds and builds trust and intimacy.
It makes sense. When someone's consistently showing they care, even in small ways, it creates that feeling of security and makes the relationship stronger. Now, one thing I was curious about, the guide mentions culture, right? Like what we consider romantic can be different depending on where we come from.
Oh, definitely. That's actually one of the most interesting parts, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because it highlights how culture can have a huge impact on how we understand and express love. The guide even gives an example. It says that in Western cultures, people often focus more on verbal and physical expressions of affection, whereas in some Eastern cultures, it might be more about subtle gestures or acts of service.
So a grand gesture in one culture might not be so grand in another. That's really important to remember, especially when we're trying to communicate these feelings across cultures.
Absolutely. Understanding those cultural nuances is crucial, especially in a language like English that's spoken all over the world.
Okay, so we've talked about what romantic gestures are and why they're important. But before we even start trying to find the perfect words to describe them, the guide suggests we need to do a little bit of self-reflection first, right?
Yeah, for sure. The guide really stresses the importance of self-reflection because, everyone's different. It encourages you, the listener, to think about your own romantic style. Like, are you someone who loves physical affection? Or maybe thoughtful actions are more your thing? Or perhaps you value words of affirmation above all else? It suggests taking some time to think back on those moments in your life when you felt truly loved and asking yourself what it was about those actions that made you feel that way.
So it's all about figuring out what makes you feel loved and appreciated.
Yeah, that's the first step. And once you've got a good understanding of that, the guide moves on to setting communication goals. What do you hope to achieve by expressing these feelings? Is it for your own personal reflection, maybe you're journaling, or even writing a story? Or are you trying to strengthen a relationship with a partner? Or is it more about, expanding your English vocabulary?
I hadn't really thought about the language learning part before, but it totally makes sense. Knowing how to express those feelings in English can be really helpful. And once we've done some self-reflection and we know what we want to achieve, what's the next step? How do we actually start preparing to express these romantic moments effectively?
Okay, so the guide then talks about planning your approach. And there are a few key parts to this. First, you got to think about which specific gestures you want to describe. Then try to remember the context, like the who, what, when, and where. And it's important to really tap into those emotions you felt at the time. And then it even suggests practicing how you might express those experiences out loud. This can help you feel more confident and make sure your message is clear.
That makes sense. It's like rehearsing for a performance, but with your feelings.
Exactly. And then for those who are really looking to improve their communication skills, the guide recommends getting some feedback from a friend or a mentor, someone you trust to give you honest advice.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, we understand what romantic gestures are, we've thought about our own style, and we've set some goals. Now for the fun part, building our romantic vocabulary toolkit. Where do we start?
The guide actually does a really great job of categorizing the vocabulary, which is super helpful. It starts with what it calls essential terms. These are like the foundational words that capture those core aspects of romantic feelings. For instance, think of the word affection. It's that warm, fuzzy feeling you have for someone.
Okay, affection, got it.
Then there's adoration, which is like a deeper level of love and respect. And tenderness, which suggests kindness and care. And devotion, which implies a strong love and loyalty.
Wow, so many different shades of love. And then we move on to descriptive words, right? The adjectives that add more color to our language.
Yes, exactly. The guide gives you a list of powerful adjectives like sensational, which evokes a strong, positive feeling. Then there's breathtaking for something incredibly beautiful, and then heartwarming for a feeling of gentle happiness and affection.
I like that one, heartwarming.
And there's also enchanting, which implies a magical quality, and delightful, meaning something that's highly pleasing, captivating, for something that holds your attention completely, and soul-stirring, which suggests a really deep emotional impact.
This is great. I'm already thinking about how to use some of these in my writing. And it's not just about describing the feelings, right? It's about the actions, too.
You're right. The guide actually includes a section on verbs that convey emotion. These are verbs that help us bring those actions to life. For example, adore, to love deeply; treasure, to value something highly; embrace, to hold closely with affection; compliment, to express praise; surprise, to delight unexpectedly; and celebrate, to acknowledge a special occasion or a moment.
Right, so instead of just saying, he gave me flowers, you could say something like, he surprised me with a bouquet of lilies, a gesture I truly treasured. It just adds more feeling, right?
Exactly. And then, to make our language sound more natural, the guide suggests incorporating idioms and expressions.
Ah, yes. Those phrases that make English so unique.
It gives some really good examples, like wearing your heart on your sleeve, which describes someone who's very open about their feelings. And then, of course, the classic, actions speak louder than words, which reminds us that what we do often matters more than what we say. And sweep someone off their feet, which is a really vivid way to describe charming someone intensely.
I love those. It's amazing how a simple phrase can convey so much meaning. So now that we've got this amazing vocabulary toolkit, how do we actually put it all together? How do we tell our own romantic story?
Well, the guide offers a really helpful structure for building a narrative. It's just starting with an introduction that kind of sets the stage. Maybe you introduce the concept of romantic gestures, or why this specific experience is meaningful to you.
Okay, so we set the scene first.
Right. Then you move on to the body of your narrative, where you actually describe the gesture in detail. You talk about the context, the actions, and the emotions involved. And then you end with a conclusion where you summarize your feelings and maybe reflect on what the whole experience meant to you.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a classic storytelling structure, beginning, middle, and end. And the guide even gives us an example of a captivating introduction, right?
Yep. It suggests something like, imagine a moment when a single gesture can change the whole atmosphere of your day. A tender glance, a comforting touch, or even a whispered word of appreciation. And then it says that this kind of opening can really grab the listener's attention.
That's a really nice way to start. And then for the body of the narrative, what are the key elements we should focus on?
The guide recommends focusing on 4 main components. First is context. So give the listener some background information. Tell them about the situation. Then describe the action itself. What happened? What was said? What was done? And then don't forget about emotion. Really try to articulate the feelings you experienced. And finally, there's reflection. Take a moment to share your thoughts on why that particular gesture was so meaningful.
So it's not just about recounting the facts, right? It's about bringing those feelings and insights into it, too.
Right. It's about telling a complete story. And for the conclusion, the guide suggests going a bit beyond just saying the end.
Okay, so how do we wrap it all up in a meaningful way?
Well, you can end with a final reflection on what you learned from that experience. Or you can talk about your future intentions. Maybe this experience will change how you express love in the future. And you can even encourage your listener to reflect on their own experiences too.
That's a really nice way to create a sense of connection, I think. Now, the guide also talks about effective verbal communication. It's not just about what we say, but how we say it, right?
Absolutely. And one of the key things it stresses is the power of using I statements. For example, instead of saying, "You always forget my birthday," you could say, "I feel hurt when my birthday is forgotten."
That makes a big difference. It focuses on your own feelings rather than blaming the other person.
Exactly. And it encourages empathy and understanding. So think about those times you felt misunderstood. Maybe using an I statement could have helped to clarify your feelings.
Yeah, I think I'll try that. The guide also mentions active listening, which seems really important for any kind of communication, but especially when it comes to romance.
It is. Active listening means really paying attention to what the other person is saying, not just waiting for your turn to speak. It's about making eye contact, nodding to show you're listening, and maybe even summarizing key points.
It's about making the other person feel heard and understood, which is really important when you're talking about such personal things. And the guide talks about finding that balance between detail and clarity. It can be tricky, right?
It can. You want to give enough detail so the listener can really picture the moment, but you also don't want to overwhelm them with too much information. It's about using clear, concise language that conveys your message effectively.
So it's like Goldilocks, not too much detail, not too little, just right.
Exactly. And the guide emphasizes that our nonverbal cues and tone of voice also play a huge role in how our message is received.
Right, like smiling, having open body language, and using a warm tone of voice.
Exactly. Those things add another layer of authenticity. They show that you really mean what you're saying.
So it's all connected. The words, the way we say them, and how we act. Now, the guide has some practical examples, which I always find helpful.
Me too. And it starts with a really simple gesture. Surprising your partner with breakfast in bed. It breaks down the action, the emotions, and the impact on the relationship. And it even asks the listener to think about similar, simple gestures in their own lives.
That's cute. Like when someone makes you your favorite meal just because. And there's another example, right? A more elaborate gesture.
Yeah, the second example is a surprise weekend getaway. It talks about the context, the planning involved, the emotions, and the reflection. It also asks you to think about any grand gestures you've either given or received.
Those are great examples. Now, for those who really want to step up their game, the guide has a section on advanced techniques. What's in there?
Well, it introduces things like metaphors and similes, which can really add a poetic touch to your descriptions. For example, instead of saying, "She was happy," you could say, "Her smile was like a ray of sunshine."
Ooh, I like that.
It also talks about blending humor and emotion. Adding a touch of humor to your descriptions can make them more engaging. But it's important to make sure the humor doesn't overshadow the genuine emotion. And then it talks about tailoring your message to the situation. Like how you express yourself with a close friend might be different than how you express yourself in a professional setting.
Makes sense. It's all about being mindful of who you're talking to and adjusting your approach. Okay, and the guide has some real-life case studies too, right?
It does. It tells the story of Sarah, who planned a thoughtful surprise for her anniversary. And the key takeaway from that story is that paying attention to detail and expressing your emotions genuinely can make a big difference.
So it's not just about the big, expensive gestures, it's about the thoughtfulness behind them.
Right. And then there's another case study about John, who shows his love through everyday gestures. And this one highlights that consistency matters. Those small acts of kindness done regularly can really build a strong foundation for a relationship.
It's about showing up consistently. That makes a lot of sense. So what are the main lessons learned from these case studies?
The guide summarizes it beautifully. It says that consistency is key. Regular, genuine gestures are more impactful than sporadic, grand ones. And it emphasizes the importance of personalization, tailoring your gestures to what makes your partner feel loved. And finally, it says that communication is crucial. Talking about your feelings and explaining the meaning behind your gestures can make them even more powerful.
Those are great reminders for all of us. And the guide doesn't just stop there, it gives us some exercises to help us continue improving our skills.
Absolutely. It suggests things like keeping a daily journal where you reflect on moments of love and affection. Maybe you write about how you felt or how you could have expressed yourself differently.
That's a really good idea. I think I might try that.
It also suggests role-playing. Like, imagine you're in a certain situation and practice how you would express your feelings. You can even record yourself or ask a friend for feedback. And finally, it recommends joining a language exchange group or finding a conversation partner so you can practice with someone else.
These are really helpful and practical tips. And it's so great that the guide encourages us to keep learning and growing.
It is. Expressing our emotions is a lifelong journey.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key message is that being able to understand and express romantic gestures in English is a really valuable skill.
It is. And it's not just about the words, it's about the emotions, the context, and being able to tell a story that truly captures the essence of that feeling.
So much more than just saying, I love you, right?
Exactly.
For you, our listener, I hope this conversation has sparked some ideas and given you some practical tools to use in your own life. Take some time to think about what we've discussed and how you can apply these insights to your own relationships.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. Think about a recent moment, whether it was big or small, where a gesture really touched you. How would you describe that moment now? What words or phrases would you use?
This deep dive is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore when it comes to expressing love and connection. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep those conversations flowing.
And most importantly, have fun with it. Language is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. What other questions do you have about expressing emotions in English? There's a whole world out there to discover.
Keep those curiosities burning.